Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab, sponsored by CPA Practice Advisor, with your hosts, Randy Johnston and Brian Tankersley.
Good day. Welcome to the Accounting Technology Lab. I'm your host, Randy Johnston, with my co-host, Brian Tankersley. Now, Brian and I have researched a lot of outsourcing firms over the years. In the last few years, we actually have looked at many, and I would suggest to you there may be a few hundred options for you out there. So that makes it confusing right off the bat. There are a number of outsourcing firms that I would keep you away from at almost all costs. And there's actually about 10 or so that we recommend. Now, it turns out Datamatics is an outsourcing firm that I think has a good reputation worthy of your consideration. The company has been around almost 50 years at this point, which is pretty stunning. About a $200 million company with about 10,000 staff and about 2,000 clients. And they've been working with CPA and accounting firms for about 20 years, with about 1,200 people focused in that area. And those are pretty strong numbers compared to many of their competitors. So, with the 150 or so CPA firms that they're already working with, you get some things with this team that you might not get otherwise. And that is experience, because of them working exclusively with accounting firms in this team, that they're trusted. They're working with small firms to large firms. They do comprehensive services, including tax, audit, and client accounting services. And they can actually minimize your investment in the overhead of hiring and training and retraining staff. All the work is done on your network, so no data is transferred in and out, which minimizes some of your IRS and SOC and GDPR and other reporting, and they are GDPR and ISO certified. So, Brian, I've kind of taken a longer cut on this morning, but we recognize from CPA trend lines, Rick Telberg, a friend of ours, has basically published that 25% of firms in the US are now outsourcing. They're doing hybrid remote work. There's a talent crisis in the US and there's a talent surge globally. So, that's kind of a setup on this. So I think there's probably three key drivers on this. So would you like to talk about outsourcing from those three key drivers?
Well, let me just first start out by saying that look, I know a lot of you listening to this said you would be cold dead and spinning at 200 RPM before you went out and did outsourcing. But the reality of it is that the even the big firms are having a hard time finding the right people, and the small firms are having a much harder time finding people. And I'm talking to all kinds of firms in small towns around the country that are telling me that they've accepted that if they want to stay in business, they're going to have to do some level of outsourcing and some level of technological and process change. And the problem with process change is that it takes a while to do that. So it's, realistically, if you're waiting on the AICPA's image campaign to come right in and save the day, or if you're waiting on the technology, the AI technology that's out there that's being used in big corporations to make it into the accounting profession, you're not going to make it till then. Okay, it's going to be a process of years, in some cases decades, to get the direction fixed. So what I would suggest to you here that you need to know about this organization is that they have global teams. Again, they've been doing this for 50 years. So there's 50 years of history with this. They've got the technology worked out, obviously, and they have the culture worked out as well, because so they're not new at this, jumping in with an offshore mindset, and then trying to learn the business culture in the US. They've been doing this for some time.
Yeah. So, Brian, your point earlier, you and I've talked about this too. Uh, Many firms said it'd be a cold day before they ever did
Yeah,
outsourcing.
and they'll be playing hockey on it,
Yeah, and I
and it's
understand.
Stanley Cup season right now, baby, and they are going to town on that surface.
I
because
understand.
it's the market's just too tough right now.
Yeah, that's exactly what's happened. So now automation may catch this up over time, by the way. And I have told outsourcing companies that their threat is automation that starts to work, but I figure that's still a few years out. And I know you've written a course for K2 this year on automation and outsourcing.
And
Top of mind set.
I just did the emerging technology session for K2 as well too. I just updated it, and I've been looking at that Gartner hype cycle and the number of years it's going to be before these technologies hit and they're in the plateau of productivity. And I'm just going to suggest to you that I think you're 5+ years from getting meaningful AI in traditional services, traditional tax bookkeeping, that kind of thing. I think you've got some today in expense reporting and AP processing and other things like that, but when you get to some of those other things, some of the more advanced things, there's just, you and I know the development roadmaps for these organizations, and they're just not spending the money on this right now. And so, it's a 3 to 5 year thing after you start spending money, and they're just not spending the money on it right now.
Yeah, now it turns out Chandra Patel, which we've known for a long time, has written a very nice document on how to pick outsourcing, which we'd recommend. But why on earth global teams at this point in time? What are some factors there, Brian?
The workload has gotten ugly. I think the shortage of CPAs is out there too. I had a guy texting me last night. He has a closed restaurant chain, and he's looking for somebody to help him do his tax work for the year he closed. And it's April the 5th as we're recording this. And I said, buddy, you're getting extended, that, right? He said, oh, I know I'm getting extended, I just don't want to go to jail. And the problem is that there's this people shortage has made accountants do a lot of things with pricing, with client retention or non-retention, and other decisions like that, where they've decided that they don't want to participate. I didn't talk to this guy, but I assume that since he closed his business, they decided they didn't want to deal with the year it closed, and so now he's having to figure something out at the last minute. So what I would suggest to you here is, as we're looking at the global teams, this lets you scale up and down very quickly. So you don't have, we don't like the scenario where we have a lot of people sitting around the staff room doing nothing, but we also don't like the situation where everybody's working 18 hours a day, or everybody's burning out. So we have to be very balanced on this. And so this lets you do more picking of the kind of work you like to do. Now, you and I both, I actually had a managing partner once said that, I do all kinds of weird consulting services sometimes. One of his consulting services was he helped one of his clients that was a widow go out and buy a new Cadillac every 2 years, and that was one of his services. And he said, the problem is that if I wanted to just do that, there's not a market for that service in this town. And so I have to do the tax work if I want to do that. Now, what if you can't find the people to do the tax work, or you need expertise that you can't get to let it delegate it? And that's the reason why global teams, because you're opening up now and you can get expertise and experience in markets all around the world, as opposed to having to wait on folks to come to your area. Some of you may live in New York, but you still have to get somebody that's, again, you still have to deal with the remote and everything else with so many people in big cities today anyway. This is really just another kind of remote, and it has a cost advantage and potentially an experience advantage too, to help you get this done.
Yeah, so in effect, a global team lets you, take care of the workloads while letting you pick tasks that you like to do, that you can work with your firm's culture, maybe being a little more client oriented in that, and that your client experience may actually improve because you've got extra labor to do the jobs, and you may be able to grow your revenue at the same time. So all of those things help, I think, with the global teams. Now, what type of services are available? You have to ask carefully when you outsource. With
Yeah.
Datamatics, they do bookkeeping and CAS, and accounting and tax and payroll and audit. In other words, all of the core functions of a CPA firm. But this varies widely based on the outsourcing company you might ask.
Yeah, and the thing you have to remember here when we get into even the applications like the tax software applications and the audit applications and bookkeeping and CAS, sometimes you have to use the outsourcer stack of applications as opposed to the one that you want to use. And so we have to we have to watch and see that they support our applications and that they'll use them the way we want them to be used. So that I think is a pretty important thing to catch here.
Yeah, and another thing is how long does it take to do? And some of these to convert to outsourcing. And usually these outsourcing firms can onboard you fairly quickly. In the case of Datamatics, they'll do a discovery call and then do follow up with operations calls. Once you sign the statement of work, let's say, a week in, then a few more days of IT setup will make it where you get ready to go live. So if you think about it, from making a decision to talk to somebody to being able to go live might be a week or two. Now, notice I didn't say your firm will be ready to use everything that they do, and that's certainly not the way it works, but it can go fairly quickly. And in effect, the workflow that then uh, occurs, and the workflows are somewhat different than you're used to in your firm. You basically have an account manager, which then speaks to team leaders on projects. They have seniors and juniors among these teams. So the best way to think about them is as pods. And the experience level at the account manager is typically 10 to 12 years experience in US accounting. The team leaders typically have about 5 to 7 years experience in US accounting. And the seniors are typically at 3 to 5 years, and the juniors at 1 to 3 years of experience in US accounting. So just think about how difficult in your market it might be to find somebody with 10 to 12 or 5 to 7 or 3 to 5 years experience. And pretty much Datamatics has those people on staff as part of the way they do business. So in terms of the governance on this, the uh, governance frequency, I think, also comes into play. With your partners, you'll speak at the executive level of Datamatics at your option quarterly. Your practice leaders will talk to the account managers at least monthly. The managers will speak to the team leaders weekly, and the seniors will talk daily or as required to the juniors or seniors on the Datamatics team. In other words, you've got two-way communications that occur, and you will build relationships with your outsourcer at this level. Now, some outsourcing teams will talk directly to your clients, but many do not. That should be a choice you make. Again, there's often language barriers for the firms that are based in India, like Datamatics is. Obviously, you'll have Indian accents, but even for firms that are based in the Philippines, like some of the other competitors, there's going to be differences in culture and language barriers in all of these different outsourced regions. So we just
And we're
ask.
not throwing any rocks here, okay? Because their English is a heck of a lot better than our Hindi or our Tagalog, okay? So, we're not throwing any rocks here, but that's the practical reality that we're dealing with. And so if you have clients that are sensitive to sending things offshore or other things like that, that's something you're going to want to weigh into that decision that you'll need to make.
Yeah, absolutely. So as Brian mentioned earlier, the automation that will replace this, I think, is going to be a while. Now, we've talked about automations, for example, like Blackore in other podcasts that are doing 1040 automation. But again, how soon will we get there to replace outsourced labor? I think it's going to be a while.
Well, even if you wanted to shut off your existing tools and switch over to Black Ore, for example, for one of the products that's actually working well, I don't know that they're doing all 50 states yet. So it's there's just a lot of this. there's a lot of elephant eating that's taking place right now in the accounting industry. And we have a lot of things that we use that have timelines that are denominated in years or even decades, as opposed to getting done here. With this, you have a timeline where you can go from initial call to starting in as little as 10 days, according to the PowerPoint. Now, it's April the 5th as we're recording this. So I'm just going to suggest that there's no way that you'd be able to do 10 days during busy season. But I would think you could move very quickly. And I just want you to see that if you've got a key person that's left, you may be able to be in a position to turn on some assistance in a in a pretty short order to fill gaps if you know you're not going to be able to hire somebody. Like if you had a key person that left, the key tax prep person, maybe a tax manager that left February the 14th. First off, they're going to have you're going to make a voodoo doll of them, and you're going to be praying for their demise daily for years, because that's just something you don't do. More importantly here, though, I think we have to think that this is a potentially a way that you can step into that situation and carve something approaching quality of life out of it on fairly short notice. So
Yeah.
it's something to just kind of file in the back of your mind that it doesn't mean they're going to necessarily have capacity at that time, but their ability to scale will be much more robust than yours or mine might be in your local community.
Yeah. So just a reminder then that the Datamatics folks have produced, Hatandra has produced a very nice ebook on how to create your firm's global team in just 2 weeks. It's one of the best guides on outsourcing that I've read, that I think is independent enough that it would be good guidance for you. Now, that said, there, as I mentioned earlier, hundreds of outsourced companies, a very few, around a dozen, that we think are worthy of consideration. And Datamatics probably falls into that group. So again, do your own due diligence here, but we have been very thoughtful about the types of things that should be covered in outsourcing. And, as I think about outsourcing, we could talk a whole lot more about it. Again, Brian, I know you just wrote a K2 course in this area where you talk about the services and the turnaround time and the skills and the security and the locations and what type of services are available and what the service level agreement should look like and so on. So again, that's another, probably a topic for another day. But are there any other closing thoughts that you'd have on Datamatics?
I think generally that I think their experience speaks for itself. And I think having 50 years of experience really says a lot, in that if we're talking about this, there are all kinds. I don't know about you, Randy, but I find that I'm getting approached on LinkedIn and Facebook and all kinds of social media from people that want to do outsourcing directly. People that are firms that are seeing the amount of money that these outsourcers are making, and they're just trying to reach out directly. And you don't know what you don't know about these folks. And the challenge here is that when you pick an outsourcing solution here, this is very much like hiring somebody. And for better or worse, once you hire them, you're married to them for a while, and for good or bad. And so you want to be sure that you can get comfortable with these folks and that they're going to work with your firm the way you want to be worked with, and that you don't have some kind of long-term commitment in there before you really get good and comfortable with them.
Yeah.
So,
And
I
go
think
ahead,
it's
Brian.
I think it's just generally important for you to do that due diligence on folks here, just like you would do a background check and check out anybody that was potentially going to come to your firm. You want to make sure you do that due diligence on the outsourcing firms out there, because there's a lot of wheat out there, but there's a lot of chaff too.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And your point, Brian, is actually spot on. I bet you I get a couple of dozen approaches a week for full outsourcing. In fact, now that I think about it, it's probably closer to 50 than 24. because I was just thinking about outsourced labor when I was quoting the number, but development teams approach us all the bloody time. Well, hopefully we've given you an idea or two about outsourcing and about Datamatics in specific. We'll join you again in a future technology accounting lab. All the best. Good day.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. We'll be back next Saturday with a new episode of the Technology Lab from CPA Practice Advisor. Have a great week.